one of the things I noticed, Mark, from interviewing people is that the hardest thing to allow is space and quiet. And then to allow questions to emerge from the moment versus the 15 or 20 questions that might have been happening in my mind before the session. And so when I was talking to Mark backstage, I said, I think would be the most exciting is if we just get up there and we're present and we just see what wants to emerge. So just so you know, that's the approach that's being currently had. I want to say a few more things about Mark that Christine had mentioned and why I was so excited for him to be here. I think there's very few leaders like him who are supporting yoga, mindfulness, consciousness within businesses and have managed to keep his own unique personality along with it as he's going about doing it. And I think there's a beauty in this ability to, I don't usually like to use the word spiritual, but living a spiritual, meaningful life and doing it in a way that's authentic to our personality. So the fact that you can still ride a Harley, I saw your tattoo on your arm. Yeah. So I think it's very hard to probably describe you. Like, would you describe yourself as the CEO of Aetna? You're also a yogi, you're also a Harley Davidson rider. I'm curious, when you think of yourself, how do you introduce yourself? And does part of it depend on the audience? And what is your authentic expression when people say, all right, Mark, what do you do?
So I think one of the most important important things anybody as a leader or as a participant in a group can do is to have impact, positive impact to move the group to where they need to go. And so I often introduce myself in the best way, in a way where I am best received as somebody who can be helpful to the group's ultimate aim and goal. And so if I need to go back to 1979, I was putting together rear axles at Ford Motor Company after flunking out of college my second time. If I need to go back to that space to talk to people about why I'm helpful, then I'll go back to that place. If I need to define myself as riding motorcycles, or I'm also a road biker, a bicycle rider, I find the place where I can connect with someone so that we can have a meaningful conversation about how we can work together to get something done, versus coming in and saying, I'm the CEO of a Fortune 100 company, therefore bow before me and pay attention to what I have to say because I'm important.
Right. So the focus is on the connection and what is most useful around that connection.
The CEOs often inside an organization have two very incredible powers. We have the power to convene and the power to set the agenda. So when I call a meeting, everybody's got to show up, the people I ask to show up. And we talk about the stuff that I want to talk about because it's my meeting. When you go outside the organization, engage in the real world, right, which is where we all need to live, the power to convene and the power to set the agenda is entirely dependent on who you are as a human being, not what you do for a living. Right. And so we can't separate work and personal life. You have to be able to connect them in a way that's meaningful, because in the exterior, in the socially connected world, that's where everything's really happening today, not inside the company.
Right. And so how do you be yourself within your company? I mean, do you feel freedom to be yourself? Certainly you must push up against the board when they know that you're speaking about alternative health methods, when that's not always what healthcare CEOs are speaking about. Do you feel like your job is to speak your truth no matter what? Or how do you do that dance between what you want to say and maybe what the company you represent?
You do it slowly. You have to do certain things that get you the job because you have to engage in certain behaviors. You have to shave every day. You have to wear a tie.
Most days anyway.
Most days. And what I found is probably the way to do it is you slowly start to introduce ideas into the organization. And actually my very first set of issues was being the first straight ally on the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce when I joined that. And everybody on the board said, well, what's that all about? Well, this is an important community. They have a strong agenda and I want to be able to help. And so I slowly started working in issue after issue. And when I started showing up to work every day on board meetings and on TV like this, the board said, is this permanent? Do you have a skin condition? And I said, it's me. Right. And I think you want me to be genuine at work. And so we've gone we started as an organization to have a conversation about covering. You know, Kenji Yoshino, the professor, the Warrenberger professor of constitutional law at NYU, has this thing about covering. And it's about, you know, what we do to hide who we really are. And that unless you can uncover and be genuine in your work, you really can't bring your best self to the situation. And so we're starting to have that conversation in our organization, and guess what? You know, middle-aged white males cover a lot more than people think.
Right.
And so being able to engage in that whole conversation about how we cover and how we're not being real, therefore we can't be present and can't be genuine to the people we have a relationship with, is a huge issue in our world today. Not only at our workplace, but in all of our personal relationships.
So when you say how we cover makes it hard to be present, can you talk about how you see that?
So if I'm worried about saying something that I truly believe in and that is part of the fabric of who I am and how I think, because I'm afraid of how people will react in the room, then I'm not going to be present. I'm going to be worrying about, okay, how do I say this in a way where I don't upset everybody in the room? You have to spend more time preparing for those conversations. So when I started introducing yogic principles into the way we met at work, I couldn't talk about, you know, being present in the moment. I had to talk about, let's turn off all of our devices, let's listen to what each other is saying, let's make sure we have complete agreement in the room.
You didn't chant the Yoga Sutras.
I didn't chant the Yoga Sutras. Didn't pull out my japa mantra and sit at the meeting, and I didn't do all that stuff. But slowly but surely, we've introduced yoga into the workplace, and people now get it. That it matters. And so you have to, again, slowly introduce the concepts, get people comfortable with the ideas, and start to behave differently. Yeah. That's really where the rubber hits the road. You can talk about it, but unless you behave differently, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. And what do you think the interest has been? Because I've heard the interest in those programs, the mindfulness programs and the yoga programs have blossomed.
They've blossomed. I mean, for example, we've now had 13,000 employees go through it, so we've more than doubled the number of employees who have participated. We sold out in 4 hours our classes across the nation this last quarter. Wow. So we do a 12-week program. We sold out in 4 hours with classes were full. So now we're trying to figure out how do we scale it large enough for people to participate. But probably the biggest issue, metabolic syndrome and diabetes will be the biggest pandemic this country will ever see. And we're worried about, in this nation, we've worried about the swine flu, the bird flu. We're now worried about Ebola and the potential people that can be killed. I was just down in Dallas. I don't think you can find Purell in the store shelves in Dallas now. Everybody's continuously washing their hands. And yet we have this disease called metabolic syndrome, which if you get it, it's called prediabetes. You have a 60% chance of having diabetes in the next 7 years. And it's catastrophic. And so there are 5 measures. It's triglycerides, it's fasting glucose, it's HDL, it's blood pressure, and it's waist size. All of our metrics inside our organization, we have all of our employees get measured every year now. We just want them to know. We pay them to get measured. And what happens is that we found everybody moved from the low 60s to the high 90% of being within range in triglycerides, HDL, and fasting glucose. People moved up into the 70s on blood pressure, being within an appropriate range. The biggest problem we have is waist size, 35 inches for a female, 40 inches for a male. 9% when we started, we're up to 21%. And still have a long way to go. And the 2 most definitive identifiers of prediabetes is fasting glucose and waist circumference. Those are the 90% R squared value, it just matches. And so we don't stop that problem, we're not going to be able to afford our healthcare system because everybody's going to be very sick. And so that's one of my sort of personal missions is to get everybody engaged in understanding what those numbers are, and then you can act on them.
And do you think the interest in the mindfulness and the yoga programs are in part a response to you speaking about it and also in response to just the way people are more conscious of their own health needs?
We saw 36% reductions due to mindfulness and 33% reductions in stress due to yoga across the population that took the course. And it was word of mouth in the organization about how people's relationships were saved, how some people were considering hurting themselves, how they stopped doing that, how they lost weight, how they got back in compliance with their metabolic syndrome. how all of these things made a difference in their life. We saw an average just on productivity alone of $3,000 in savings in the company on the people who went through the program.
Wow.
And so the word of mouth spread.
Right.
And our deal with our employees is if you help us control our healthcare costs, we're going to give you money back.
So
So
why
last
doesn't
year,
every
employees
company,
got $250 back.
why
each.
doesn't every company do this?
Because it's hard to do. People are afraid to have this conversation with their employees. You're overweight, you're going to be pre-diabetic, that's going to cause you, when you leave some point later in your life, to be very sick and live a miserable life. And by the way, you can't afford it.
Right.
And nobody wants to have that conversation. I have that conversation with my son, 28 years old, and his friends, and as soon as you say, have you ever heard of pre-diabetes, all of a sudden the lights go off. They don't want to hear about it because it's not their problem now.
Right.
But you have to show people the numbers. And we had people that thought they were perfectly healthy who had some pretty bad numbers. And it just shocked them into thinking differently about how you had to do it. So it started slow. People thought we were going to do yoga because I did yoga. So the CEO does yoga, so everybody's got to do yoga now. And I think what happened is as people started to experience it and the word of mouth spread, now we have people lined up to get part of the program. And and by the way, that impact on the quality of life and their personal relationships with friends and family outside of work have all improved as a result of the work they've done.
So you would think that almost every large company in the country would be interested in mindfulness-based programs in their company if those statistics ring true for other ones.
Right.
That's not the case.
No.
So what do you think is that bridge, since it seems like the research is there?
Yeah.
We know what helps.
Right.
And yet, if you look at widespread use, most companies, they're just working as fast as they can and trying to get as much stuff as they can, and it's just like a bunch of rats on a wheel. What do you think is the conversation that needs to be had that switches the conversation to more of a wellness and wisdom-based approach?
I'm starting to have that conversation, and there's a group of us called Higher Ambition Leaders that have been meeting for the last 5 years. The group has grown. I'm one of the co-founders of Fix the Debt in Washington, much maligned as CEOs trying to bully the government into doing bad things. Not so. We're trying to get the economy back on track, and our whole approach now is going to be, we can't wait for the government to figure it out. Corporations need to help the middle class reestablish itself. So I think there is a lot of interest now in investing in our employees in fundamentally different ways, particularly those at the lower end of the compensation schedule, instead of hammering them on merit increases and healthcare cost increases, and oh, by the way, you should be happy you have a job, and that ultimately reflects on your product to the people that you serve. And so I've been talking about, and we're going to try and steer Fix the Debt here, is about a new social contract with our employees. We want to help you. You need to come part of the way and help us. And if we work together, we're going to both end up in a much better place. And that's raising the bottom wage of our organization, which we're nowhere near $10.10 an hour. That's way lower than we offer. But we need to raise up the lower wage in our company. And for people who don't have the means, we need to eliminate their cost sharing for their health care in exchange for their willingness to participate in programs that help them get better, show progress in those programs, and to give us a better product when they come to work. I call it a fair wage for meaningful work. And I think people want that deal. And so I think part of that is going to be, we all have to be mindful. The work has to be a better place to be than the way it is now. And I think this sort of slash and burn mentality, I did it for a long time. The slash and burn mentality doesn't work.
And so now you actually have a personal practice
that
keeps you in balance. Can you say a little bit more about where that is and why that's important to you? And why
it
you spend an hour doing nothing a day or whatever time it is?
Yeah, it's, I get up early. I do asana pranayama. I actually do Vini yoga, so motion and asana connected to breath. So nothing happens unless it's initiated by breath. That's Gary Kraft's style in the American Vini Yoga Institute, my teacher. And then I do Vedic chanting, so I have my chants that I do, and then I do meditation, and that usually can go anywhere from, depending on the time, 45 minutes to an hour and a half every morning. And that sort of sets the pace for the day.
And you do the yoga because I know you had a very serious injury. So you can't do yoga as as other people who...
Yeah, there are some asanas I cannot do. And I think that was one of the reasons I was attracted to the American Vini Yoga movement because they believe that people with disabilities can be yoga practitioners as well. You don't have to hold the pose perfectly. You don't have to be able to stand on your head and spin around 3 times and spit nickels. You don't have to do all that stuff. That there is a part of the practice, and it's really about, right, because of the 8 limbs of yoga, it's an understanding of the yamas and the niyamas, and then it's using asana and pranayama to prepare the body to sit in meditation for an extended period of time. That's what asana and pranayama is about. It's not about looking pretty. It's not about having your Lululemon clothes on and being in perfect shape and being in these perfect positions that everybody goes, oh my God, that's a perfect downward dog.
I look great.
You look great. You know, that's not what it's about. It's about preparing yourself to sit in meditation for an extended period of time because the journey's here inside. And it's in taking care of yourself first before you can take care of others, as I tell my team. Unless you take care of yourself and you have a personal practice, you can't possibly take care of the people you've been challenged to lead.
So how do you blend the two? Because most people who are CEOs of large companies with how many employees?
We're at 48,000.
Okay, so with 48,000 employees, generally they don't start a spiritual practice in the midst of that workload.
Right.
Or if they do, they quit, right? And they go off and get a house in the country or whatever they do, and they do their thing.
Drink.
Yeah. You've chosen to stay engaged internally and very much externally. And I'm curious what inspiration is, what inspires that?
So it's part about how I think about my job. I shouldn't be in this job. I got here by accident. And I got here by accident because I was on a journey that somehow all the things sort of fell the right way and the right opportunities came along. I've never looked for a job. I've never interviewed for a job. People have always called me with a problem, an opportunity, or an idea and said, can you help us? And I've said, sure. And so that journey led me to this position. So every once in a while, one of us sneaks into the C-suite that actually is a little different than the person out of central casting.
Right.
And so for me, it's like I am awestruck that I have this incredible opportunity to do this work and to have this kind of change. And I have to be prepared for it. It's like training. And so part of my training is keeping my head clear, being present, and being capable to lead what is an incredibly important thing. I was on the stage with Secretary Robert Gates last week with my employees, and he talked about large organizations and leading organizations. I was kind of in awe. 3.2 million people, a budget of $700 billion. He ran doing pretty important things around the world, or at least trying to do them the right way. And I think about that way with my own work. This is an incredibly important industry. We need to get it right. It really is the key to our economies around the world. Healthcare is the single biggest drain on economies everywhere. How do we get it right? And if I'm partying till 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm cruising around, hanging out with the CEOs in the CEO club, I'm not paying attention to what's happening at the office or steering the organization, which is really hard stuff. It's not easy work. Right.
But you feel called to take on that challenge in a way that stays connected to what's genuine in you.
I have not had to work. I have not had to work since 1994. And so I am
You've not had to work.
Right, since 1994.
So you work because you want to work.
I work because I think this is important and I want to have an impact.
Gotcha.
And so and if you really want to have an impact, you have to be trained, you have to be ready, you have to be prepared to do it.
Right. And so what would your vision, do you have a few nuggets in terms of if you did have control over how our healthcare system could work?
Right. Like a wave a magic wand?
Yeah, if you had the magic wand, what would be a few things that you would...
So we need to redefine health. Health is a productive individual who's economically viable and happy, not somebody who's absent of disease. I am as healthy as I can be, given that I'm a spinal cord injury survivor with chronic neuropathy. And I live a pretty productive and functional life.
Even in constant pain?
All the time. My arm never stops hurting. It hurts all day long. It never stops. And so you have to learn to cope with it. It's the kind of pain that would have most people running from the room with their hands over their head, or at least one hand over their head, because this one I can't put over my head, in pain. And what you do is you learn to deal with it, because the alternative is you don't.
Or you drug yourself.
You don't keep going. I don't use any drugs, or you hurt yourself, which is one of the common side effects of this injury. And so, if you think about the kind of the kind of work that we need to do every day, the kind of work that I need to do every day to be prepared and to do my work and to lead an organization. The personal practice is important, and the healthcare system needs to support me. There is not, the path I've taken, craniosacral therapy, acupuncture, yoga, meditation. Naturopath, I see a naturopath around my nutrition. None of that is in a diagnostician's book to say, based on your spinal cord injury and your chronic neuropathy, here are the 5 things you should do. I had to go find all of that, and it took me a decade to do it.
And you run a health insurance
company. And I run a health insurance company. And so if we had the ideal system would be, we're going to keep individuals productive, economically viable, and happy, and if we do it person by person and community by community, we have a better world to live in. And the way you do that is then to look at the disease burden, the demographics, cultural, environmental, social, economic trends in a community, and you say, for this group of people, this is the kind of healthcare system we need. This is where we need our facilities. These are the kind of practitioners we need to have. These are the kind of technologies we need to have. Here's how we engage them. And that system becomes the most important economic engine of creating a vibrant and healthy community. There are no insurance companies in that. There aren't. You don't need an insurance company in that model. What you need is an economically viable healthcare system that's supporting getting everybody healthy, productive, economically viable, and happy.
Through any method and all methods.
Any methods and all methods. So there are no benefit plans. So you don't have to figure out if it's covered or not. It just gets taken care of because it's the most important thing to keep you healthy.
Right.
So if I need to send a nurse to your house every day in the morning to make sure you're taking your medication, we should do that.
Right.
If a mother of 3 needs diapers because she can't afford them, we should do that. If a senior person needs a cab ride for a follow-up visit within 2 weeks after a congestive heart failure discharge, which is the single biggest predictor of whether or not the person gets readmitted, we should pay for the cab ride.
And it's funded by, in this vision?
If we do it right, the costs take care of themselves and the quality rises and the community's economic viability supports it.
Okay.
It all works together. And so the problem is that we're organized the way we are now.
Right.
And so here in the United States, it's a bit like a gum scrape, getting gum off the bottom of your shoe. You have to go layer by layer by layer and tirelessly do it. Where in the Middle East and in China, we're actually doing this work from the ground up because they don't have anything.
Wow.
And they're building it new, and they're worried about all the chronic diseases and the poisons we have exported to those countries in the form of fast food, where they now have an obesity problem. The highest incidence of diabetes is in the Middle East. And these people have a chronic disease burden that's coming and an aging problem in China that's coming that's going to dwarf ours. And so they're worried about this. So we need to begin to build that system. I think it'll happen over there before it'll actually get done here.
Really? Because we're so ingrained in what we have.
The political and economic barriers to change here are significant.
Right.
People think I'm crazy.
I don't know if you're crazy, but I do feel like there's an energy and the excitement that people have that whatever the old model is doesn't work. And that we want something, speaking for ourselves, that promotes us living healthy and doing the right things versus us waiting for some time when we get sick later on and having to argue with the health insurance company about what they cover and what they don't cover. And they've never supported us for the last 5 years anyways, and so there's this frustration. And I think it's that level of partnership that's often missing. And it feels like that's what you're encouraging and asking.
That happens between the provider and the member, not between the member and the health plan. It needs to be a relationship there.
Right.
And so we're empowering health systems to take risks. We're giving them the intellectual property to manage it. We're getting out of the way. And we're supporting them and doing the right things for their community.
Right.
Because it should be about keeping my doctor in my hospital, not about keeping my health plan. So, the keep what you have thing that's been going on in Washington, ridiculous. The hubris of insurance companies, I think it's about them. It's really about these people keeping their doctors in their hospitals and the relationships with people that help them get healthy.
Right.
That's where we should have that debate. And so you're right, 72% of Americans think the healthcare system is badly broken and not helping them keep healthy.
Yeah.
How much more information do you need to say that some change is required, right?
Yeah, and that's what keeps
It's not like we're on the edge of dissatisfaction. It's 72%.
And that's what keeps you in the position that you're in.
Yeah, that's what makes it fun.
And where does awareness-based programs fit within this vision?
Well, I think we all have so there's there's an old saying, garbage in, garbage out. So if you bring a bad input into a system and it does nothing to change the individual, and it becomes just another bad output. Right. There isn't anything about the healthcare, there is no magic bullet. You shouldn't be able to take a pill after eating chips and drinking beer and all these other bad things that we do to ourselves, these poisons we put in our body, then expect the system to cure you immediately as a result because you just went to a doctor or a hospital. Right. There needs to be a partnership that shows people, like we're doing with employers. I think wellness will shift away from employers and will move to health systems where that relationship and that investment works over the long haul, because those people live in that community and those health systems should be providing those services. So we need to, again, part of our whole thing is going to shift the whole wellness idea so that the whole interaction with the healthcare system is about how do you stay healthy, and that dialogue, giving people the information that they need and the simplicity of making it happen that will ultimately get people engaged in it. It's too hard right now for people to figure it out.
And did you come to this through your own personal experience and injury?
It was a mess, And with my son's cancer, with my own injury, living in the hospital system, I just had what was to be a minor surgery. I won't say where, and it ended up being much more involved in my left shoulder 2 weeks ago, and I ended up with a hospital-acquired infection. And that is dirty hands. And I asked everybody that walked in the room, and you should do this if you're in a hospital, here's another statistic for you. 63% of clinicians wash their hands before they touch patients. There are doctors who kick the wash stand on their way into the OR instead of washing their hands because the thing has to go on before the door will open. So 63%. So the most important thing you can do in a hospital is not ask, is this the right medication, or what's on my plate, what's for dinner tonight? It's, did you wash your hands? You can't touch me until I know that you washed your hands. 63% of clinicians. So I don't want to be
infection. Even as
I'm still dealing with it.
Wow.
Yeah. Very good institution, very well-intended people. They did a great thing for me, but I ended up, and I didn't want to stay in the hospital. I tried to go home that night, but it ended up being a much bigger deal than we thought it was going to be. I had to spend the night.
Right.
Dirty hands.
Right. So you've had a lot of direct experience with the healthcare system that's been not always satisfying.
It's disconnected. People don't think about your nutrition. Yeah. That's why I go to a naturopath. My allopathic doctor can't talk to me about nutrition and leaky gut and what foods are antagonizing all that stuff. He looks at me and goes, that's all voodoo. Right. Well, I'm 180 pounds and you're... right. So, how's your nutritional advice working for you? And I think... And so it's all about feeling good about who you are, taking care of this vessel that you're on this leg of the journey with. And part of that is having advice from people who care about that stuff. And nutrition's not often connected to medicine, nor is psychology. Right. Or psychiatric services. Right. The mind-body connection. Right. Is not often there. So you have to find that.
And so what do you think the possibilities are of extending the programs that you're doing at Aetna that seem to be working out into the larger sphere of influence?
We offer them to other people. Metabolic syndrome programs taking off. We have employers who've engaged in it. One of our largest clients has 85% participation in the program because they pay people $500 a year to take the test.
Wow. Now, how much of it is the mindfulness, how much of it is the results of the test, and how much of it is just being mindful of something that you might not have been mindful of before?
Well, I think it's connected, right? The data is an important input to say, I thought my blood pressure was under control, it wasn't. I thought I had a low cholesterol, I don't. I thought my fasting glucose was under 100, it's not. And when you say, okay, these things when connected together mean you're going to get really sick with a really bad problem in a very short period of time, in your lifespan, turns on a light that says, okay, now how do I lose weight? Right. How do I think about the food I put into my body? Right. How do I take care of myself every day? And those practices are the practice we said, here's a great idea, mindfulness and yoga. Right. Here are some incredible things you can do to help you manage that. Right. And I get letters from employees all the time about how much weight they lost and how their relationships have improved and how it saved marriages. Right. And if you just save one life, the $190,000, $200,000 we spend on the program every year is like cheap, right? Just one life, it's cheap.
And what is the response you get from other CEOs or other leaders?
How do you do it? Why do you do it? How can I do it? And I think the biggest issue we're going to confront is most employers don't have the space for it.
Physical space.
The physical space for it. And we don't have the practitioners to do it. So it's not like somebody who went to 3 weekend classes at Yoga Works to teach yoga. It needs to be somebody who's been really trained. Sorry if anybody went to Yoga Works. I'm sure you got really good stuff, and I don't mean to, but you know, it's not a weekend class. It's somebody who's really trained classically in how to teach yoga. You know, mindfulness is not somebody who read a book and said, okay, now I'm a mindfulness expert. There are people that do MBSR and all this other sort of stuff really well. I was telling Soren earlier that I just had 12 people at my house for 12 weeks doing a Sangha. And you know, on MBSR, and it was really cool. And watching people evolve through the process was just amazing, including me. Right. And so I think, you know, that stuff's good stuff. Right.
So the CEOs who hear about it are actually genuinely interested?
Right. So we have some we're actually doing it for. We run into this issue of, can we get enough yoga teachers? Can we get enough mindfulness teachers? So we're working with computer-based training, so online mindfulness, you know, eMindful is one of the companies we use. As a way to do it. We're having pretty good results with that for people to be able to do it. I like the personal touch better.
Sure. But so the other CEOs who most of them are open and interested.
Sure.
But in terms of the how, there's barriers in terms of where do we do it in the company and who do we hire?
Do we do it during work hours? We allow it during work hours. You know, I think it's a good investment. You know, we don't have to have, you know, we don't, a lot of our employees, frontline employees are single mothers, they got to get home to get the kids and all that other sort of stuff. We got to give them time to do it, so we make space. You have to work with the middle management folks who are saying, well, wait a minute, why is somebody out doing yoga? And you know, you have to work with those folks who don't.
And you say to them,
yeah, they are. So I send a personal note. Saying, it appears that you have a problem with this. Let me remind you how important it is to the company and to our customers.
Right. Okay. Excellent. So we have a few minutes for questions. We have a mic runner, and I'm going to encourage the mic runner to see if you can find somebody from the back, and then somebody from the front, and then somebody from the back, and somebody from the front. And that's, again, the power of a CEO within that environment, is that you can set the stage for what is important and what's not important.
You can convene and set the agenda.
You can convene and set the agenda, and if your board doesn't like it, they can deal with it or get rid of it.
My board is incredibly supportive. They love the work we're doing, and they are thrilled with the strategy we're pursuing. So
and the results speak for themselves.
And the results speak for themselves.
Because when you took over Aetna, I don't think it was the best, at least on the market.
We were at $29 a share. We closed at 75 or something today. So we've had an impact.
And that's how many years ago?
Pardon?
How many years ago was it when you?
That was 3.5 years ago.
3.5 years ago.
Right.
So it's almost tripled.
Yeah.
But even with all this weirdo stuff going on. Okay. And you not shaving every day.
No.
Still.
And I don't wear a tie, and I bring my dog to work, all that other sort of stuff.
Hi, I've got the mic. Hi, I'm Leah DeSole. I'm a practicing psychologist in New York City, and I do work with trained in MBSR and MBCT. And what's wonderful to hear you advocate the alternative therapies that you talk about. Unfortunately, Aetna doesn't pay for any of those. And when I teach MBSR or MBCT, I don't get paid.
Right.
It goes beyond 45 minutes, and it was in 2013, Aetna removed the code for even reimbursing for 1 hour.
Right.
So how do you reconcile that with what Aetna actually pays for in the world?
Because employers won't put it into their rate. So every benefit that goes into a benefit plan today, and that's why benefit plans are a problem, comes up to a rate. And employers look at their benefits and say, I want to eliminate this, I want to eliminate this, I want this product, I want that product. Now, we still have some employers who are enlightened enough who buy these products for their employees. But given the rapid rise in costs, they continue to cut benefits back every year to offset the increase in healthcare cost trend. And unfortunately, they go to what we call the soft benefits first as a way of eliminating them.
Well, I hope you find some way to intervene in that positively and productively, because that's where most people are getting their health insurance.
Yep.
So the employees are looking to cut, or the employers are looking to cut back what they're.
And yes, they're putting in these big deductibles. And so what we've done is we've created an HSA that pays for these services. So people can submit for these costs into their HSA at our own employee population. They can put in craniosacral therapy. All these other sorts of things are eligible for reimbursement through their HSA plan as a way of compensating for it.
Even if their employer is choosing not to?
Well, no, for our employees.
For your employees.
So employers have to be willing to do it.
Did you have somebody?
Question here, a bunch of questions.
Your vision of how healthcare should work in the United States is wonderful and inspiring. I'm just wondering, it seems like there's a fundamental economic problem, which is that healthcare costs as a percent of GDP keep going up.
Right.
I think we're more than double many Western European countries,
Right.
and everything is going in the wrong direction in terms of obesity. People are living longer. Businesses are saying we can't keep spending, like 20% of people's salaries on healthcare. The whole thing as a system just seems out of control. Are there any ways systemically to change that, to make it economically viable?
Yes, there are three. The first is that we have to change the way we pay for healthcare. Currently, we pay by the drink, so we get more drinks. And until we change it to, here's the budget that we want to live within for each person, and let's work to keep them healthy so they don't spend that money, we'll never make that change. And the best example of that is in 1983, there were 750 bed days per thousand in the United States. Today it's below 200. People don't go to the hospital anymore. And that change happened because we went to the hospitals and said, we're going to pay you a DRG, a fixed amount for every admission. And all of a sudden, the admissions started to disappear and the days started to fall. And we have to do that with the whole healthcare budget. We have to come up with a fundamentally different reimbursement model. When that happens, we're only 18 to 36 months away from dramatic changes in the way healthcare is rendered in this country. The second part is that the top 5% in the nation spend almost 50% of all the healthcare costs. Because there's top 5% of people spend 50% of our healthcare costs. Because they are largely unmanaged, they wander through the system and they bounce from provider to provider because there's nobody helping them manage their care. On average, 10 doctors, 10 prescriptions, and 25 prescriptions and 10 doctors each. They're spending $9,000 a month for their health care. And so we need to get them what I call concierge services, where we actually partner them with somebody who will help them navigate the system, get off their polypharmacy, get to the right group of healthcare providers as a way of managing their health. My belief is we can hold those costs steady for the next 5 years without it seeing an increase and improve the quality of care that they get. That's $90 billion a year we save in healthcare costs. And then the third one is we need to begin this journey of wellness, and it needs to be in the right place, and it needs to be based in communities, not employer by employer, because employers making investments in wellness, if that employee leaves and the turnover in employee populations is much higher now, they lose that investment. It needs to be community-based. And what we found in China is that we're actually using it in worksite safety programs and other things where we're beginning to introduce the notion of wellness as an individual responsibility. If we can create that opportunity, it's a 20-year journey. But if we make room with the other two things, changing the way we pay for it and taking care of the sickest people, we can make more room in the budget. Currently, there's $810 billion a year that gets wasted because of these issues. If we just live within that budget and hold healthcare costs flat for the next 5, 10 years, we have a heck of an opportunity to right the system and and we could cover everybody. If we fix that $810 billion, we could pay back half the nation's debt in a decade. That debt we all worry about being burdens to our grandchildren and our children. We get half of it done, we can do what Bowles Simpson tried to do, and if we get just 20% of it, we could pay for health insurance for everybody in the country without having to raise taxes. So that's where our focus should be, and it needs those 3 steps, I think, are the steps that would get us there. We have somebody patiently up front here, too.
Yeah.
Hey, Mark, my name is Kendra. I work for a pretty awesome employer, REI. I have Aetna Insurance. I'm calling to thank you just to pass on a sincere thank you, because in the past few weeks I've experienced some challenges and have been completely astounded by the quality of support I've received from my EAP program through Aetna. The phone support, the clinician that was available at 4 o'clock in the morning, and although I do know a lot of mindfulness-based practices and stress relief, when things are hitting the fan, it's really nice to have someone to remind you that you can breathe and think calm or peaceful or peace, who can share resources, who can give me websites. When I go on the website, there are modules and things that can help me. I am blown away by the resources available to me through my employer's insurance, their choices through Aetna. So I'm just saying thank you.
And REI, thank you. And REI is an incredible employer to work with because they get it. They get the investment in their employees, and we have a lot of employers that do that. And I think that's why employer-based health insurance will ultimately die, is because it's so disparate between employers, and it needs to be really community-based. But REI is a perfect example of the kind of programs we can offer when we have a partnership with somebody who really wants to invest in their employee population.
Excellent. So time for probably one more. Did you see
Yeah,
something?
I think this young lady up here was really patient.
Okay.
One of the first hands up.
Hi, thanks.
If you can say your name too, it just helps us connect.
My name's
you.
Bianca, and I have got a bit more of a personal question. I was really interested when you were mentioning around other CEOs and people coming to you. They want to know how you're doing it, how to do it, etc. And then you mentioned, I might have heard you wrong, that you had a 12-week program in your home.
Right.
So I'm wondering, do you, when you're, because I'm curious about the consciousness around CEOs and the transformation that's happening there, do you recommend people to go anywhere specifically to learn, or are you really hosting transformational programs in your own home, or where are you sending people?
It depends on where people are. So there are a number of CEOs who shall go unnamed who I've suggested that maybe they might go to a naturopath to work on their weight problem. And my naturopath,
With success.
With great success, by the way. I had one CEO come up to me and grab me from behind, pick me up, and say, "You've saved my life." And I think that recommending resources to people about how they ought to think about it, because as you make your own journey and people see that you are different, they ask why. And how do you get away with it? And how do you manage your board? And how do you do all these other sorts of things? And we actually have a group called Higher Ambition Leaders that's looking at this work, why companies can do good and do well. And our company is a perfect example of it. We're not perfect. We have a long way to go. But I think, and that's why I'm still doing the work, but I think if we can continue to generate this interest among CEOs, our group started with 5, it's now 40. We hope it'll be 100 or 200 or 300 at some point in time.
And is
I
that
think
just
that's
health, or is that mindfulness as well and meditation practice?
It's everything.
Right, cool.
We actually did a thing on mindfulness at one of our programs, and I'm not the person. When I first joined my MBA program at an Ivy League school, and I walked in the classroom, my classmates will tell you they thought somebody had let the wrong person into the room with my long hair and my flip-flops and the way I walked in the room while they sat there with their chinos and their iZods on. And people thought, this guy's the wrong guy. And I think a lot of business schools would not have let somebody like me into their programs back then. They are now. And I think we need different kind of leaders, and I think we're building those leaders, and I think there's a lot of receptivity on the part of CEOs to this kind of change.
Excellent, thank you.
And it also seems like there's actually things we can host in our homes
There
that
is.
don't require necessarily approval from any organization or
No, there isn't.
institution. And the costs are minimal.
Yes, the MBSR program we did was, in the grand scheme of things, cheap, and it was a great event. It was a great way for all of us to relate. We were all friends.
Right.
It was a great way to us all to relate to each other in a fundamentally different way.
Right.
It went from watching football and drinking beer to, wow, we can really have meaningful relationships with one another that are deeper than getting together and having a drink.
And that's something almost anybody can do, regardless.
Anybody can do
of
it.
Yeah.
It's really cool stuff.
Yeah, excellent. So unfortunately, we're 5 minutes over. I want to thank Mark for coming and being
Thank you
present
so
with
much.
us.
Good to be here.
I just want to say, I know you get asked to speak in front of many crowds, and I just really appreciate you taking the time for us and being able to speak on these topics like wisdom and mindfulness that I'm sure there's people in your organization who would rather you be going out and talking about other things, and I really appreciate you taking the time for us.
It's great to be able to find an audience that actually likes this stuff.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good to see you, my friend.